Well, the truth is that I often don't know what to do. Sometimes study and reflection, deep thinking, prayer, and meditation can help and usually get me to a decision that I feel somewhat confident about. But even then, I'm usually very skeptical, enough to remember that I might have gotten it wrong, usually second and triple and quadruple guessing myself. Now, it might be a risky thing for a pastor to admit that he doesn't know, especially after the church has just made a monumental decision. But he is uncertain, that he second guesses when he does make a decision. But I also suspect that it's a pretty common experience that in your jobs, your relationships with your family and your friends, in the community groups you volunteer and lead, that you experience something of the same. Sometimes you just aren't sure what is the right thing to say or to do. Now, we don't usually like to admit that we don't know, that we are ignorant, that we are uncertain, that we have limitations. But that is precisely what Paul is saying in 1 Corinthians 13. We might have missed it because we're used to this being the love chapter. We're used to hearing it read at weddings. But the funny thing is, this does not come during Paul's discussion of marriage that occurs in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. This chapter comes in the midst of his discussion about the church, about its unity, about how each person's spiritual gifts are to work together in the body of Christ. So really, in its context in the letter, this chapter is a lot more about what it means to be church members than it is about what it is to be spouses. In the Willis Barnstone translation, we read, "We know only in part, we prophesy only in part, that when perfection comes, then what is in part will disappear." When I was a child, I spoke as a child, I thought like a child and reasoned like a child, and when I became a man, I put an end to childish things. For now we look into an enigmatic mirror. One day we will gaze face to face. Now I know in part, but then I will know in full, even as I am fully known. Now we're a little more familiar with the beautiful translation of King James. It says, "see in a glass darkly." The New Revised Standard Version that was read tonight has a rather tepid in a mirror dimly. Barnstone admits that King James is the lovelier poetry, but the more accurate translation is we look into an enigmatic mirror. Now that's a pretty evocative image, I think. And the first thing we need to remember is that ancient mirrors, of course, were not glass. They were polished metal, usually bronze. And so mirrors did not give the perfect, sharp images that you and I are used to. And I really needed one after I'd been in the house 3 days. I'm not going to carry what I look like before tonight. Ancient mirrors were blurry. They obscured. The images were somewhat mysterious. They were affected by the lighting, how you held it, how it moved. In a word, enigmatic. The image which St. Paul uses is also a subtle reference to the Exodus and to the tabernacle that the children of Israel first worshipped Yahweh. Maybe you remember last year when we were studying the tabernacle, we came across the verse in Exodus 38:8. He made the basin of bronze with a stand of bronze from the mirrors of the women who served at the entrance to the tent of meeting. When all the Israelites brought their various possessions to the artisans to craft the implements of the tabernacle, the women brought mirrors, because that was among the possessions that they had, these bronze mirrors. And they were then shaped into the wash basin that would stand just outside the entrance to the tabernacle. Rabbinical tradition says that the reflective surfaces of the wash basin obscurely reflected what the priest was doing inside the tent. And so the people gathered outside the tent could obscurely see what was going on inside because of the reflective surfaces of the mirrors on the wash basin, seen in an enigmatic mirror. In this way, Paul uses the mirrors of the tabernacle to suggest that now we only have glimpses of God, and that in the future we will know God face to face. Of course, in biblical tradition, no one has seen the face of God. Not even the great Moses had that privilege. Moses got to see God's backside, And even that event, he walked down from the mountain radiating, glowing with the experience. And yet Paul promises us that we will know God face to face. Great poetry, which 1 Corinthians is, often has multiple shades of meaning to the images that it uses, and that's true here of this mirror image. It's not just a reference to the tabernacle in Exodus. Mirrors have often been used as an image for our knowledge and its limits. When we look into a mirror, what we see is ourselves. And so if our knowledge is like a mirror, think about what that means. It means that everything we think we know and we think we see is really affected by what we brought to it to begin with. We see ourselves in the mirror of knowledge. Our prejudices, beliefs, and opinions affect the things that we think we know. Paul, I think, wants us to be humble about our claims to knowledge. Even when we think we know something to be right or true, it might just be our own prejudices, our own preconceived ideas reflecting back at us. Frederick Foray, the American philosopher, uses the image of the mirror to explore what human technology and craft reveal about who we really are as human beings. We see reflected there in our technologies inhumane, foolish, self-destructive, and tragic aspects of the human creature. Our knowledge, lofty and admirable though it is yet imperfect. Our values, sometimes noble, are often short-sighted or worse. We see reflected the heights and depths of what we are. A mirror, our technology, can reveal our values, our true nature, and thus become an instrument for social change. Well, lately, Michael and I have been watching the television show Battlestar Galactica, quite in marathon fashion over the last 3 days. Now, I'm not talking about the campy show from our childhood, but the critically acclaimed one from this decade. We don't have cable, and so we didn't get to watch it when it was on. We instead borrowed DVDs from Scott Spencer, and we absolutely loved the show. I've watched it so much the last few days, no wonder it's on my mind as I went to write a sermon. The basic plot is that humanity has created robots called Cylons to provide labor and service to humanity. And the Cylons have rebelled, and there's been a war. There was a truce, and during the decades that followed the truce, the Cylons evolved and prepared for the next war. When it came, it was a surprise attack that quickly destroyed the entire human species, save for 50,000 people, or close to that, who escaped in spaceships and are now being hunted through the series. Now, the major advance of the 1970s version of the story is that the Cylons now look like humans. They have fleshy bodies, they bleed and hurt, they feel, and can be psychologically traumatized. And because you never know whether that friend you're working with is a human or a Cylon agent, the potential of fear and panic is constant. This is clearly a post-9/11 science fiction story. But one thing I love about the show is the way it deals with this very issue of how we are reflected in what we create. The Cylons were created by the humans, and anything they do, including deception, murder, even attempted genocide, is something that they have learned from their human creators. And in fact, the Cylons themselves contend that they're on a mission from God to destroy the human race because humans no longer deserve to survive. The wiser humans on the show realize that their own values and natures are being reflected back at them, as in a mirror enigmatically. The wise ones realize that the sins of humanity, and they struggle with issues of how to survive and how those might conflict with their core values. Is it enough to survive, or do we have to deserve to survive? Should we create a new type of human society that doesn't deserve destruction? And more importantly, can we generate the will to actually make that